Imagine a king so wealthy that he accidentally destroyed an entire nation's economy simply by traveling through it. Imagine a city that attracted scholars, poets, and architects from across the known world. Imagine an empire that controlled more gold than any other kingdom on earth, and yet somehow the world forgot it existed. This is the story of the Mali Empire, and the real story is far stranger than anything you have been taught. Before the Mali Empire rose to dominate West Africa, the landscape was already ancient with power. The Ghana Empire had ruled the region for centuries, growing rich off the gold and salt trade that flowed like blood through the continent's veins. But by the 11th and 12th centuries, Ghana was crumbling. Drought had weakened its agricultural base, wars had fractured its political grip. The old order was dying, and into that vacuum something new was waiting to be born. The Manda-speaking people known as the Mandinka lived in a small kingdom called Kangaba, nestled along the upper Niger River. They were traders, farmers, and warriors, but for a long time they were subordinate. They served under the Soso Empire, ruled by a king named Sumanguru Kante, a man so feared that legend claimed he wore a tunic sewn from human skin and possessed supernatural powers. He had crushed the Mali people, killed their princes, and seemingly extinguished any hope of resistance. But that was only the beginning. There was one prince Sumanguru had not killed. His name was Sundiata Keita, and Sundiata's story begins not in triumph, but in tragedy. He was born partially crippled, unable to walk as a child, mocked by those around him. His father had been king, but after his father's death, Sundiata and his mother were exiled, driven out by rivals who saw him as weak, as nothing. He wandered for years through foreign courts, a king's son with no kingdom, a warrior who could barely stand. Then things took an unexpected turn. Sundiata rose. Through sheer force of will, he learned to walk. He grew into a military commander of extraordinary skill, gathering allies from across the fractured Manda kingdoms. And in 1235, at the Battle of Kirina, he met Sumanguru Kante on the battlefield. The legends say Sundiata's archers fired an arrow tipped with a white rooster's spur, the one substance that could break Sumanguru's supernatural protection. Whether you believe the magic or not, the result was real. Sumanguru was defeated, the Soso Empire collapsed, and Sundiata Keita became Mansa, Emperor of Mali. What he built next would reshape a continent. Under Sundiata and the rulers who followed, the Mali Empire expanded at a staggering pace. At its height, it stretched across nearly 3 million square kilometers, roughly the size of Western Europe. It encompassed the goldfields of Bambouk and Bouare, the vital salt mines of Tagaza, and controlled the trans-Saharan trade routes connecting sub-Saharan Africa to the Arab world, North Africa, and ultimately Europe. Every grain of gold that moved north, every block of salt that moved south, passed through Mali's hands. And Mali taxed every single transaction. The wealth that accumulated was not just significant, it was incomprehensible. Gold was not Mali's only resource. The empire became one of the world's great producers of copper, kola nuts, and ivory. Its agricultural system, centered on the fertile Niger River Valley, fed millions. Its cities were not outposts. They were cosmopolitan centers of learning and commerce that rivaled anything in medieval Europe or the Middle East. The city of Timbuktu alone tells the story. By the 14th century, it had become one of the greatest intellectual centers on the planet. Its markets overflowed with goods from 3 continents. The Sankore Mosque functioned as an informal university drawing students from as far away as Egypt, Morocco, and Andalusia. At its peak, Timbuktu may have had as many as 25,000 students, in an era when the entire population of London was barely 40,000 people. The scholars of Timbuktu were not simply reading imported texts, they were writing original works on mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, and Islamic law. Hundreds of thousands of manuscripts were produced during Mali's Golden Age. Many were buried, hidden, or lost to centuries of conquest and neglect. But scholars have since recovered and cataloged these documents, one of the largest collections of pre-modern African scholarly work ever found. And then there was Mansa Musa. If Sundiata built the empire, Mansa Musa made the world notice it. He came to power around 1312 and ruled for roughly 25 years. He was, by virtually every historical measure, one of the wealthiest individuals who has ever lived. Some economists place his net worth above $400 billion. Others say the number is simply incalculable because the empire he controlled produced somewhere between half and two-thirds of the world's entire supply of gold at the time. In 1324, Mansa Musa decided to make the Hajj, the Islamic pilgrimage to Mecca. He assembled a caravan of 60,000 people. His personal attendants alone numbered 12,000, each dressed in brocade and Persian silk. He brought 80 camels, each carrying around 300 pounds of gold dust. He gave so generously in Cairo that he flooded the Egyptian economy with gold, crashing its value and triggering an inflation crisis that lasted more than a decade. One man's generosity destabilized an entire nation's financial system, but even within this dazzling wealth, the cracks were already forming. After flooding Cairo with gold, Mansa Musa had depleted so much of his reserves that he had to borrow money from Egyptian merchants to fund his journey home. The logistical and administrative demands of sustaining a vast multi-ethnic empire across 3 million square kilometers were immense, and those demands would only grow. After Mansa Musa's death around 1337, the empire began its slow unraveling. His successors were weaker rulers, less skilled at holding together the complex web of alliances and trade relationships Mali depended on. Internal power struggles grew more frequent. The Tuareg grew restless. The Songhai, longtime subjects of Mali, began to push back. In the late 14th and early 15th centuries, the Songhai launched increasingly bold challenges to Malian authority. The Mossi kingdoms raided from the south. The Tuareg captured Timbuktu in 1433. Trade routes became dangerous. Tax revenues dried up. There was also an environmental dimension that rarely makes the history books. The Sahel region suffered significant droughts during this period. Farmland that had sustained millions became less reliable. Communities that had once been loyal subjects now had more immediate concerns: survival. By the end of the 15th century, the Mali Empire had contracted to a fraction of its former size. The Songhai Empire had absorbed most of its territories and major cities. The Great Empire, the one that had shaken the global economy, built Timbuktu into a beacon of learning, and sent a king across the Sahara with 60,000 companions, was gone. And the world moved on and forgot. The reasons for that forgetting are not accidental. When European colonial powers arrived in West Africa, they brought a preconceived narrative that Africa had no history worth recording, no intellectual tradition worth preserving. The manuscripts of Timbuktu were dismissed. The oral traditions that carried Mali's history were treated as folklore. The physical monuments slowly returned to earth. What remains today is extraordinary. The great mosque of Djenné is still standing, one of the finest examples of Sudano-Sahelian architecture in the world. Timbuktu, now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, still bears the outlines of its medieval grandeur. The manuscripts that survived are slowly being digitized and translated. The legacy reaches further than architecture or parchment. The trade networks of the Mali Empire shaped West African commerce for centuries. The story of Sundiata Keita, the exiled, crippled prince who returned to build an empire, became one of the most enduring narratives in African oral literature, still performed today by griots who preserved this history when the written record failed. The Mali Empire at its height was richer, larger, and arguably more intellectually sophisticated than most kingdoms of medieval Europe. Its scholars were writing books while European peasants struggled through the Black Death. Its cities thrived while much of the Western world was locked in feudal poverty. Yet it occupies a single paragraph in most world history textbooks, if it appears at all. What else have we forgotten? What other civilizations built wonders and created beauty, only to be erased from the story we tell ourselves about the human past? The Mali Empire is a reminder that history is not a complete record. It is a collection of choices about what to remember and what to let fade. And sometimes the things we let fade were the most extraordinary of all.